All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's live online author event with Greenlight Bookstore. I'm Katie from Greenlight Bookstore, and we're excited to host tonight's event celebrating Bloomsbury Object Lesson Series with two very topical titles in the series. Tonight's reading and discussion features Tobias Carroll, author of Political Signs, and Kenneth R Rosen, author of Bulletproof Vest, so you're in for an excellent time. Before we start, I just want to say a huge thanks to Tobias, Kenneth, and the team at Object Lessons for making this happen, and to all of you for showing up. Though we're not able to host events in our store spaces, our community of authors and readers is still here. We're grateful for your support and for the chance to make space for conversation and connection. Now, before we get started, there's just a few housekeeping things to go over. In our Zoom webinar tonight, you can see and hear the speakers, but they can't see or hear you. They can see that you're here, though, and you can see a count of fellow attendees on the top of your Zoom screen, though the exact location will depend on what kind of device you're using. You're welcome to post your thoughts and comments in the chat. That's a great way to show your appreciation for the authors and to interact with fellow attendees. And if you have a specific question you'd like to have answered by the authors, please post that question in the Q&A module. You can find it by clicking on the icon that looks like two little speech balloons. We'll be pulling questions only from the Q&A to be answered in the later part of the program, so make sure you're putting them there and not in the chat. We are recording tonight's event, so look for video or audio versions on our social media channels later on. And importantly, tonight's featured books, Political Sign and Bulletproof Vest, are available for sale from Greenlight Bookstore. We're excited to be able to offer actual shopping in our bookstore locations from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday, and you can purchase Tobias and Kenneth's books and many others on site. Or you can order online at greenlightbookstore.com for a quick pickup at the store or for shipping anywhere in the US. We even have some signed copies of Political Sign on hand, as Tobias is able to stop by and sign them for us. So you can request those in the order comments when you order online or pick them up in the store. If you care about supporting the careers of authors and the ongoing existence of independent bookstores, buying tonight's featured books is a great way to show your support. Tobias Carroll is managing editor of the literary website Volume 1 Brooklyn. He is the author of two books, Real and Transitory. His writing has been published by Vulture, Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, Hazlitt, Literary Hub, and the Paris Review, among other places. His new book, Political Sign, chronicles the secret histories of political signs and illuminates how the signs around us shape us in ways that we often fail to appreciate. This is a book about signs, but it's also a book about reading, and a book about how one thing becomes the other. Kenneth R Rosen is a journalist at the New York Times and a contributing writer at Wired. He received the Bayou Calvados Normandy Award for War Correspondence in 2018 and was a finalist in 2019 for his reporting from Syria and Iraq. His new book, Bulletproof Vest, is at once an introspective journey into the properties and precisions of a bulletproof vest on a molecular level and on the world stage. It's also an ode to living precariously, an open letter that defends the notion that life is worth the risk. Tobias is going to start us off with a reading from his book, and then Kenneth will be reading from his, and then they'll be talking with each other and with all of you. Please take it away, Tobias and Kenneth.
I see the Greenlight logo. Hopefully you all can hear me. This is Tobias. This is Political Sign, and this is the introduction to Political Sign, which will tell you a little bit about what to expect from the book itself. If you grew up anywhere in the United States where there was open space, you probably saw them punctuating the local lawns and median strips and vacant lots in the weeks leading up to Election Day. Halloween decorations beside squat, rectangular placards pounded into the surface of the earth. In retrospect, their ubiquity borders on the comic. Where else can a sign advertising a home for sale, a sign touting the services of a lawn care company, and a sign endorsing a candidate for the highest office in the land all take on the same proportions, the same placement, the same significance? It isn't hard to see political signs wherever you look. They might be touting candidates running in a general election or for their party's nomination in a primary. They might be held aloft as a gesture of protest or as part of a counter-protest. You might even see one rendered as a tattoo on someone's body or transformed into a work of art hanging in a museum. You can see them in the background of historical photos or contained within coffee table books, lurking in the background of film and television sets, or at the corners of a comic book panel. And if you see enough of them, when you know what to look for, you can start to read places like books, the inner workings and deeply held beliefs of towns or cities or counties, all ready to be revealed. This is a book about political signs. As such, it's covering a lot of territory. The little signs hawking a particular candidate that dot suburban lawns in the autumn months, political sign. The handwritten poster held aloft at a protest to challenge the status quo, political sign. The billboard set up beside a highway by one political party or advocacy group, political sign. The 19th century illustration of a presidential candidate as a hardy blacksmith, that is a political sign as well. But political signs can go beyond that. In 2012, a man got a face tattoo of the logo of Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney, effectively transforming himself into a walking political sign. The use of political signage in sports, whether on the field or in the stands, remains hotly debated and varies dramatically from league to league and sport to sport. And certain political signs have gone on to have an unexpected afterlife in museums or as props on stage and screen. What does a political sign mean outside of an explicitly political context? Does that context defang it, or does it subtly transform the surrounding space? Consider this book a kind of mixtape, blending case studies with personal reflection and a few forays into theory. In recent years, political signage has undergone a series of convulsions, with the presidential campaigns of Barack Obama in 2008 and Donald Trump in 2016 using signage in fascinating and even transformative ways. The same could be said for the Leave campaign in the United Kingdom in the summer of 2016 and a host of other elections and referendums around the globe. Some political signs are universal, while others are specific to their time, place, or region. But all of them can tell us something about the circumstances under which they were made, from the most generic ones imaginable to something hyper-targeted to a specific audience. Consider it something that comes with the printed nature of the signs. Print gave intensity and uniform precision, where before there had been a diffuse texture. Texture, wrote Marshall McLuhan in his book Understanding Media. Print brought in the taste for exact measurement and repeatability that we now associate with science and mathematics. Every political sign tells a story. It may not be a particularly complex or pleasant one, but it's a story regardless. When I spoke with Susan Carlson, assistant curator at the International Center of Photography, she talked about the motifs that recur in political campaigns. Themes, imagery, and catchphrases are all repeated frequently, Carlson said. For example, Republicans used Ronald Reagan's "Winwood for the Gipper" in various ways in the campaigns for not only Reagan, but also George H.W. Bush, Bob Dole, and George W. Bush. Political signs and other ephemera, it could be argued, were memes before the term was ubiquitous. And I'm going to stop there.
I always appreciate hearing another object lesson author read their book, because they all take this really interesting and esoteric approach to the subject, right? And we don't really have guidelines when we're contracted to write these books. So it's a fascinating look into something that's so relevant today. I mean, less than 2 months out to the presidential election. So I hope to get more into that, but I'm just going to jump in quickly, do a quick reading from Bulletproof Vest. A little bit different than Tobias's book insofar as mine is focused a lot on the personal. I'm going to be reading from the middle of the book, which shifts between present tense and past tense, reportage and personal narrative. And at this juncture, I'm returning to assignment in the Middle East and bringing along my Bulletproof Vest. In early 2019, I prepare for another trip to Baghdad, and I pack a new vest. It is not made of bullet-resistant fiber, but it can accommodate my 2 ceramic rifle plates. It is the opposite of my first vest: subtle, light, concealable. I'm just as scared as before, but I have a routine now. Spend weeks planning, book my flights, arrive in a conflict zone, report a few stories, hope they work out and get published, fly home. The vest became as standard a packing item as the gas mask, carried with me out of perceived necessity, though rarely worn. I deplane at the Baghdad International Airport, and on the jetway I see a man with a very high, coiffed fade, dressed in a threadbare brown suit. Something about him reminds me of an undercover policeman, and I look down as I walk past him, hoping he doesn't stop me. As I'm stamped through immigration, I see the man in the suit again. He introduces himself as my fixer. He'll help me navigate the country and try to keep me safe as I do my reporting. I've never worked with him before, and I joke weakly about walking past him. We get my bags, and soon we are driving through the streets outside the green zone, passing beneath the 14th of July bridge bathed in neon lights. He grumbles to himself as we pass through another checkpoint. "I hate it," is one of his favorite phrases, along with "you're high," and "I'm not your girlfriend, man." We talk about why he lives here in Baghdad, where it's still dangerous, and what things cost and how expensive it is to live in the United States. "All people think foreigners have much money," I say. "Not me," he says. "I'm different." We pull over for dinner. We talk briefly about how a man must appear in Iraq, how officials care that he has 2 nice phones. They judge the shoes he wears, the car he drives, the phone he uses. We eat kebab at a second-floor restaurant in the darkness of a cool winter night, everyone dressed in hoodies. A fixer is an indispensable lifeline to a foreign journalist working abroad. They provide everything from sources to housing to security. They offer cigarettes and companionship, risking their lives to help tell stories that are oftentimes close to home for them personally. That dynamic, so intimate a relationship in small bursts, can be difficult to navigate. I tell him I am nervous. "No one has ever said that to me before," he says. What I mean to say was that I was scared about the assignment, not of him. He puts down his kebab. He sits straighter in his chair, avoids eye contact. He has misunderstood me. He thinks I don't trust him, is insulted, and now we have disconnected. We fall silent. I reach for my chapstick and pop the cap on and off again, dawdling as I try to pull the conversation out of a stall. I feel vulnerable. I scan the exits and realize I have no idea where I am in relation to the compound where I'm supposed to stay. I had read and heard about fixers, or those who disguise themselves as fixers, selling other journalists to militias. I had read and heard about wrong turns taken down wrong roads controlled by bad people. He toys with his phone, checking the time, or maybe sharing our location with someone or a group of people. The men behind me get up to leave. I'm twitchy. Since our first WhatsApp conversation, he had demanded money. He was nasty when I was late to reply, and he had me buy him cologne to bring him as a gift. I'd been traveling for 36 hours at this point, though. Maybe I was tweaked and needed to sleep, a refuge I could turn to almost anywhere with the help of a pill. If he is going to sell me out, my PPE isn't going to help me. We leave the restaurant and drive away toward the compound where I'm staying. I hope. I check our location on my phone, making sure we are heading in the right direction. Why'd he turn there? Is this the right street? "Let me ask you a question," he says as he stops the car outside the compound and pulls the emergency brake. I believe he's going to ask why I said I was nervous. He drapes himself over the steering wheel, looks at me and says, "Can I have money?" I ask him how much, and he says $200. I tell him no, absolutely not. I had sent him more than $500 before the trip and would pay him more after the trip was finished. Money, another protective layer we can wrap around ourselves, felt like good insurance. I understood that to keep it until the end of the assignment meant that, at least until I finished my work, I held some power over him. He says, "Thank you." And I'm thinking he did not understand. I say again, "No." I said, "No." He says it again, sarcastically, staring into the dark alleyway. "Thank you." I think he's going to call off our trip if I don't pay him, or maybe he'll call friends to come collect his money and call off our trip anyway. It is late and dark. I'm exhausted and I panic. I dash to my room and use the key he had given me to unlock the door, then lock it behind me. I wedge a door jammer between the floor and the door and breathe a bit easier. Then I begin thinking he copied the key and now has access and can come and grab the money. So I sit on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for footsteps in the stairwell. The safety of the room, the privacy, gave me perspective. My suspicions were off base. I felt repulsed by my perceived disrespect and my fear. I should have concealed it, not worn it on my sleeve. If I had passed on dinner and gone straight to the apartment, if I had slept before meeting him, perhaps our rapport would have started in the fresh light of morning and been stronger. I would have been more assured. Confidence begets confidence, and I hadn't given him a chance. My armor is near the door. An hour passes. I settle, I breathe, I'm calm. My sweatpants and Cliff Bars and soft items of comfort distract me. They keep me safe. So in relation to the object in question here, Bulletproof Vest, it's really more of a broader perspective and look at what we deem to be protective equipment, which is something more of a topical discussion now with PPE being in the common vernacular. You know, the idea of having something that is supposed to keep us safe, but in reality, there are other things that are within or outside of our control that keeps us safe. And in this instance, I was hoping to just sort of play with the idea of friendship and companionship being the one really close and important part of safety. But I guess we can open it up to a broader discussion now. How do you want to proceed?
I think, yeah, I mean, that kind of segues, actually, there was a question I wanted to ask you kind of in a similar vein to what you were just talking about. So if that works.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, reading your book, one of the things I found most interesting was seeing, I'm very used to PPE being in the context that where it's been in the news with respect to coronavirus for most of the year, where it's been more medical equipment. And it took me that there was that brief moment of like, oh, right, yes, a bulletproof vest would also be, would also obviously, fall into the same category depending on the circumstance. So, I mean, I guess, but you're also, when you're writing about Bulletproof Vest, you're also viewing it through your own experience as a war correspondent. So did you know from the outset that you were going to kind of be exploring it from that particular angle, or did that take some refinement as you kind of got closer to the heart of it?
Yeah, I think on my last trip, I had an encounter with this fixer, who I describe in this story, and then another one in Syria, which really brought to light this idea that the best safety I can afford myself is the people who I surround myself with. I rarely ever wear the vests. I rarely ever wear the gas masks. I rarely ever wear the helmets, but I'm consistently surrounding myself with more or less strangers, and taking the word of friends or colleagues who appoint these people as my fixers. And to not invest more in those relationships, I was finding was more damaging to my safety and security, and my own feelings of safety and security. So I came back from that trip and looked through my journals and quickly wrote what ended up becoming Bulletproof Vest. I think that the process of writing an object lessons book is so organic in that way, right? You come across the subject matter that you inhabit on a day-to-day basis. I think something so common of a theme in your book is this idea of the signs being this great barometer of our country's feelings and emotions, whether they be a tattoo on the face or a billboard. You go into Europe and sort of like the groups who coalesce around sports and all these other signs that are indicative of political standings. How do you feel about writing something about the tenor of the country in such a divisive time leading up to what many believe will be a new White House, a new administration, yet for some reason miss what we missed back in 2016, which were very much those lawn signs present in places outside of major metropolitan cities?
Yeah. Writing this book was a very strange juggling act, because I obviously wanted to keep the book relatively current, but I also didn't want to write a book that would be obsolete the day after Election Day 2020. So sort of trying to, partially, I write a lot about both the Obama and Trump candidacies, because I think both of them did make use of signage in a very interesting way. But yeah, I'm trying to think of the best sort of way to phrase it. I think it's a difficult thing as far as sorry, my brain is just not having the proper day. It can be overwhelming to it was overwhelming to sort of figure out a point at which to sort of have as a cutoff point for writing this book, because I think I probably could have written an entire book about political signs that is the size of this one, focusing only on things that took place essentially since I turned in my final version of the manuscript.
Right.
There was this thing that was on the news, I think, last week, where there was that image that I think the Trump campaign tweeted out that was just the image of a sign of like all of the Trump lawn signs in a row, where it essentially looked like a graveyard. And it's kind of like that as an image is just so loaded, and the way that even in that case, the political signs were used by the Trump campaign in one way, and then for people who were critical of Trump's handling of of coronavirus, you know, it's sort of the way that they're displayed almost makes it look like it almost played out like sort of political agitprop and a satire of the Trump administration, which I found particularly fascinating. But yeah, it was a difficult thing to sort of find that balance between the historical context of political signage and whatever, and sort of and what's going on now. Although the other thing that I think that I kind of went into a little bit in the book is the way that I think these sort of the MAGA hats have kind of become its own genre of almost parody. But I also, well, I know I've had friends who have made use of parody Make America Great Again hats. I don't really know how effective that is, because I think the font is so small that if you step back, if you're not looking at it, like, it just looks like a Trump hat. And I think that's kind of this sort of terrifying way in which the thing that is being parodied is able to kind of overtake the thing, is able to kind of overwrite the parody of it, which I realize sounds like a bad science fiction novel, but I grew up reading a lot of bad science fiction novels, and so that's kind of how my brain works.
I want to take a quick moment to just tell all of our participants and attendees that if you have any questions for either myself or Toby, you can pop them into the Q&A section of the chat, and we would be happy to answer them. One of the things that I did want to note is that so much of political signage nowadays, and I'm sorry if I'm focusing this too much on the current mindset, current culture. You know, you got Pepe the Frog, you have all these memes, you have such maybe not so blatantly political signage, right, that we come across in our day-to-day lives on social media or when we're speaking with people. How does one know, or how can one differentiate between what is merely innocuous rhetoric and actually a political active, you know, a call to arms or a call to action?
Yeah, well, I think with something like Pepe, or the way that the Boogaloo Boys have kind of weaponized Hawaiian shirts. I have a Hawaiian shirt hanging over there where I'm like, I don't know if I can ever wear this again, because to someone this is going to be like, I do not want a second American Civil War, but someone might see that and be like, oh, hey, this guy's down with the cause. I mean, I invoke John Berger a couple of times in the course of Political Sign, and I talk about media literacy a lot. And I think some of it is just, you know, some of it I think is just people should be more, you know, the internet is a really great way to be, if you use it in a certain way as a tool, it's a really great way to be more media literate, but it's also obviously a way that you can go down horrible rabbit holes of disinformation and everything else. But I think, you know, I think it is incredibly difficult, though, because there are certain things where, like, there are certain memes and certain things where it's not necessarily speaking to you know, to a wider audience. There are certain things where I might see something referenced on Twitter and just kind of go, oh, what's that? That's weird. And then a day later find out that this is some sort of like horrific far right sign of far right wing extremism and, you know, whatever else, and realize that this seemingly innocuous thing is actually something much worse. So I think just in terms of being aware, I think it's, yeah. Oh, sorry. I did not mean to interrupt.
I was just going to say, so in the course of writing the book, did you come across an instance where someone did, no. Did someone that you, in the course of writing the book, did you come across an instance where you found someone who donned a Hawaiian shirt or mistook a sign by accident and promulgated it in a way that maybe it wasn't intended by that person, but was mistaken by someone else?
There's one of, I mean, one of the people who I wrote about, was sort of this guy who sort of has fancied himself as sort of the right-wing equivalent to like Banksy, where it's using this same sort of like street art influence style, but using it towards kind of a right-wing aim. So I don't think I got too far into the people being sort of people misidentifying certain things, or you know, people getting completely ideologically confused. But I think there are certain gray areas, whether it be, you know, in the sort of rise of populism that you've had in the last couple of years, there can be, in certain ways, things coming from the populist right that can sound a lot like the populist left. And then in other cases, there are, you know, kind of parodies of different things. One of the things I wrote about was the fact that the Bush-Cheney campaign in 2004 created a sign-making template on their website, which quickly got hijacked as a tool of satire. But I mean, that is also something where people use, I think the examples were more absurdist or more parodying from the left, but that could also be used to, you know, I'm sure there were people who also used it to critique from the right, or, you know, use it for far more nihilistic aims. And I'm sure if either the Biden or Trump campaigns tried something like that in 2020, it would quickly be hijacked by the worst people on the internet. So yeah.
I guess nobody vacationing in Hawaii is going to be mistaken as a Boogaloo boy, or I guess anyone wearing a swastika isn't going to be, you know, thinking that they're promulgating peace, or you know, the former iteration of the sign. We do have some questions here from Deborah for you. For Toby, can you give an example of a sign quote used in a transformative way, as you mentioned in the introduction?
So I think I would personally say, I think the Shepard Fairey Obama Hope signage posters did a pretty significant job of kind of changing what was possible. You know, one of the things that I wrote about in the book is I was doing some research at the Monmouth County Historical Society in Freehold, New Jersey, and I was going through, because I mostly just wanted to see like what was going on for local elections, what was going on for for presidential elections. They had this very interesting array of different things, and one of the things that really struck me was like I was looking at like a George H.W. Bush bumper sticker from 1988, and then I was looking at a Clinton Gore bumper sticker from 1992, and like for all intents and purposes they looked identical. Like if I did not know anything about either of those politicians, if you gave me one of those and said which one of those is the liberal, which is the conservative, which is the Republican, which is the Democrat, it's like they were the only real difference were the names that were on them. Whereas I think aesthetically, I think the sort of the Shepard Fairey designed the Hope image, I think, is a more, you know, nominally progressive thing. And I think to some extent the Make America Great Again hats are, I mean, the use of red is kind of is a very, you know, has become associated with conservatives in the US. And I think the fact that it is the least hip thing, you know, those are not like amazingly like designed hats. They are the most sort of generic looking red hats you could wear. And I think part of it is that, and I think part of it is the way that that's been used, I think is very interesting and is, like it or not, sort of transformative as well. I mean, and especially when you look at some of the things that Trump was doing compared to, like, I talk about him a little bit, but like the Jeb Bush campaign, where it was like, Jeb, with the exclamation point. And it's like, oh, that's cute. But I think in both cases, there was something more than just this sort of generic, like, here is the last name of our candidate, here is the last name of their running mate, here is the year in which this election is taking place, and that's it. I think both candidates in their first runs for office took that in a much different territory than their predecessors have, and I think it still remains to be seen what's going to happen next. I mean, I don't think either Clinton or, I mean, you could see the effects of Obama's work, in, say, the Clinton 2016 and Biden 2020 campaigns. But I don't think either of them has felt as like, oh my God, what is happening? This is a huge break from what's come before, in the same way that Obama's did. And I would imagine that whoever is running for the Republican nomination after Trump's time in office ends, it'll be something similar. But I don't know. I could also be completely surprised. I don't know.
I guess that's if he ends his, if he has a second term, and if he allows us to move on with our electoral process, without causing a stir.
I'm
we have
trying.
another question from Dorian, or a question from Dorian for both of us. At what point did you know you had a book here? The series is about the hidden life of ordinary things, but maybe some ordinary objects are just, quote, ordinary. You want to start off with that one, and then I can...
Sure. I mean, with this one, I think for me, there was I was kicking around the idea, and I think it was the point at which I realized that I could write about political signs, but it wasn't just, originally I was thinking about just doing yard signs, and then it was kind of like, okay, political signs. And then as I was thinking more and more about it, I realized, like, okay, there's a lot I can cover. It doesn't just need to be, yard signs in suburban front yards. It doesn't just need to be protest signs. It kind of has to be all of these different things, and hopefully there will be some connective tissue as to how they all come together. So,
and if only you could if you could just get Trump into the title of the book, then you got a real bestseller on your hands. No, I think it's a really good question. I appreciate all the questions that people are asking. I don't know. I think the point of the series is to reveal that they aren't so ordinary, right? That what is in fact quite ordinary to us, when taken into a deeper context or looking at more thoroughly, is not actually ordinary. I described this scene earlier where I was working with a fixer who I didn't really know, and understanding that my bulletproof vest couldn't really protect me in a situation like that made something that had become ordinary for me, carrying around a bulletproof vest, through the TSA checkpoints. Go for anyone to travel with a bulletproof vest if you're not a felon. That it became something that wasn't so ordinary, and that because it was ordinary, it was maybe extraordinary in that way. And for the editors of the series at Bloomsbury, they're so generous in giving us latitude to really explore whatever rabbit trails we want to take, and write in whatever way we feel is most prizes the object itself. So grateful for them for giving us the ability to do that in so many different fascinating ways. I think there's 80-something books or so now with totally different narrative structures and styles and approaches, and it's really quite unique. We have a question again from Deborah. Wanted to just ask me, why did I decide to donate some of the proceeds to RISC? Appreciate the question, Deborah. RISC is, for anyone who doesn't know, is Reporters Instructed in Saving Colleagues. It's a not-for-profit that trains freelance journalists who operate in conflict zones on everything from first aid to digital security techniques. A lot of the journalists who file reports from the Middle East, say, or Southeast Asia, are unsupported and write story to story, paycheck to paycheck, and have to pay for their own security details, have to pay for their own fixers, And this is a organization that gives a little extra training and security to those freelancers for free, and also provides them with a first aid kit that they can travel with to these conflict zones and countries of interest. So I decided to give some of the proceeds of my book to them because I know that that had helped me in the beginning of my reporting to have that foundational understanding of first aid, trauma first aid, and digital security, so that I could not only help myself in the event of a catastrophe, but also a photographer I was working with, or so on and so forth. So thank you for the question. Kate asks, thank you both for this reading and discussion. Did writing your respective books change your relationships with your respective subject? If so, in what ways? Toby?
I think for me, it definitely, the sort of widening scope of this book, it changed my relationship to it in the sense of I became much more aware of trying to figure out what was or what was not a political sign. I mean, I think one of the things that I talk about in here a little bit is like, when I was on tour for my last book, my tour mate and I stopped at an art museum in Minneapolis, and we were looking at what they had, an exhibit of that was sort of photographs from different countries where there had been protests going on, and it was sort of photos documenting movements for social change. And you saw a lot of photographs of political signs there. And I think there's that question of like, if I'm watching a political sign at a remove of one step, is it still a political sign, or has it become somehow a work of art in terms of that? And I think it sort of forced me to grapple with that. I don't know if this would necessarily be a changing my relationship with political signs, but the book became a little bit more personal after as I began writing it. Initially, I did not plan to sort of get into much in the way of first-person accounts, and as I began working on this, the first person became a little bit stronger and a little bit more ubiquitous within the context of the book. So.
Yeah, I don't think my relationship changed all that much, other than me realizing that I didn't need the Bulletproof Vest. Though I guess when entering into a country like Syria, they sort of require it or ask you to bring it. And of course, editors are comforted by the fact that you have one or are carrying one with you. I guess I was going to ask, have you in your own life started to notice more and more political signs as you're going about your day-to-day, or things that you hadn't noticed since publishing the book?
It's weird because I think if it were a normal year, I would see more, but because I've been largely, I've been spending a lot of time indoors because of the pandemic, I haven't seen quite as much. It's more like I've seen reports on the news. The one thing that I think when I was writing the book, that I would not have seen coming was the degree to which Black Lives Matter has become an accepted part of sporting events. At the time that I was writing this, it still felt very much like this point of contention, depending on the league. But I mean, if you had told me that I would be watching like a Premier League game and every player on both teams would have Black Lives Matter on their jerseys, I would have been shocked, but not in a bad way. But I think that was probably the biggest. That's probably been the biggest shift for me. I mean, I haven't seen anything from either campaign that has necessarily shifted me during the election, that has suggested that they're doing something different. Although I was on Twitter yesterday, and I've been seeing some discussion of kind of political signs in potential swing states, and if people are seeing a lot of Trump signs and not a lot of Biden signs, is that is that a forecast for what we can expect from the election more so than polls? And that was the one thing that, like, yeah, this was literally yesterday. So and I was kind of like, all right.
I think that's so important. I mean, I remember 2016. I had a property up in upstate New York, and I was living in Brooklyn and Queens at the time, and I'd leave the city to drive through upstate New York, and second you left the city, it was Trump signs everywhere, and I was stunned to think that people didn't see this coming or had thought otherwise. And to the point of the Black Lives Matter, I mean, once it was just Colin, in the NFL, and the moment it's shifted to NASCAR, and then you have Lewis Hamilton in F1, who's making it on this global stage. It was a major sea change of what we had seen in the States prior to I guess earlier this year. And I guess political science can also be Twitter's reaction to some of Trump's tweets, right? I mean, this idea of flagging is also a political sign in its own right? Yeah. Or am I getting that wrong?
I think that it's something that hadn't. I think one of the other things that, like, they had not been flagging when I was writing this, but I definitely think that, like, the way that Twitter has kind of been weaponized. I mean, I read a little bit about a satirical group where some of their imagery has also kind of gone viral on Twitter because of that, because of just how it's constructed, and that makes sense. Actually, I had a question back for you, which is, so writing about bulletproof vests and PPE, and sort of the rise in violence where you've seen, for instance, police attacking journalists in the streets of the U.S. I'm curious, like, did things like that affect the way that you had thought about bulletproof vests and safety and trust and things like that you had written about in the book?
Well, when I was writing it, I wrote it over the course of just 2 or 3 weeks in early 2019, I think it was. And so it was certainly a dangerous time for journalists around the world. There was something like 220 journalists killed that year alone, or the year prior in 2018. Many more detained or arrested for similarly fraught incidences. But there was nothing happening in the States that was as disturbing as what was happening this year, as far as colleagues of mine being shot in the face with tear gas or rubber bullets, or we saw one with her eye nearly gouged out. And some can subscribe to the belief that maybe it was just in the chaos of everything. It's hard to differentiate between friend and foe, but I don't think there are foes in these instances.
Yeah.
And that we need to take steps to protect the media as they're covering these events. And it's upsetting to see more and more this shift away from trust in the media and realizing that the media is serving both the police and the protesters at this juncture. We see the shift very clearly in the police themselves just filming from their side, and then you have the media filming from the protesters' side. It's this clear line between who is seeing what and how it's being disseminated from the lens of the holder. So it wasn't per se affecting my writing at the time. It just hadn't happened yet, but it's certainly disturbing. I mean, people who cover these protests, the photographers, most importantly, wear gas masks all the time. They also have their own PPE, whether it be a soft shell bullet resistant vest or some sort of gear, and they're right there on the front line trying to get these pictures and these images out, and are risking everything only to be assaulted, more or less. Yeah. And I think we have another question. There you go. For you, Toby, do you equate the flag with political signage, perceiving that it signals a particular ideology?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think at this point, at least, sort of, if I saw a political sign or a flag, a lot of shots of a flag in a political advertisement, and I knew nothing about the candidate, I would probably there might be a slim thought that the candidate was more Republican than Democrat, but I think both parties have sort of used at least the sort of the current American flag as kind of a, I don't want to say a prop might be a little bit overly cynical, but have used it as kind of window dressing in a number of contexts. But I think something like the join or die, don't tread on me flag has definitely I think something like that, or something like obviously the Confederate flag. I think there is much more something other than the current American older versions of the American flag or flags from other parts of American history. I think there are certain ones. Yeah, like I would certainly, thinking about it, I would certainly say that for a lot of people, the Confederate flag is very much a political sign. But I'm not. I think the American flag is still used with enough ubiquity that it doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of ideological or partisan in one way, or partisan ship in one way or another, basically. I think it can be difficult to know. It is certainly something where it is symbolically used frequently, but I don't necessarily know if I think it's because it's been used so frequently, it's lost some of that power.
Well, I think even, and you touch on this a little bit in the propaganda aspects of the book, or the underlying theme of propaganda, that the flag is still a nationalist sort of political sign, right? I mean, it's still a unifying symbol. It doesn't have to necessarily represent a party, but it represents a political idea.
Yeah.
And I think I always recall just this flight I took from JFK to Moscow and connecting to Beirut, and how the video that was playing on the headset in front of me about how they had more destinations than Aeroflot, the Russian carrier, had more destinations than any other carrier in the world, and had the best service. And even moments like that, even if it's not political, it's still it's a sign of influence, right? Of some sort of influence. And it's hard to realize that so much of the things that we interact with and see ends up being political in some way, even if it's not necessarily a flag.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that came up in the book was kind of the in sort of mid 20th century was the point at which you begin to see more and more contemporary advertising, the sort of advertising techniques being used in a political context, whereas before they had not been. And I think I trying to sort out where certain things begin and end now is a lot more difficult, because to some extent the idea of a political candidate is as a product who can be sold, or in the case of a country that might be more parliamentary, the idea of a party's platform as something that is as much a product as a can of soda, or a burger or something else, which is really, like, when you think about it, it's like, Jesus, that's how the hell did we get here? That's a little bit unsettling. I've got a question for you in the Q&A. How do you think the sense of security from PPE, as in COVID, affects people and society for better or worse?
That's a tough one. I really appreciate it. Dorian's partner. I guess at the beginning of the pandemic, I had really imagined that people were using masks as a way to continue on with their lives. And I thought that was very dangerous, insofar as the masks are meant to protect you, but only so much, right? It was something like 43% at the beginning would help prevent you from contracting the disease through the air droplets. but almost immediately after my thinking people were going to use it as a reason to go out, masks became this political sign, as it were, of oppression, or whatever the rhetoric was at the time. I think people needed to remember that the masks aren't supposed to be an end-all solution. It's not supposed to mean that you can go out there and just live your life. It's if you need to go out, this will keep you safe for the most part, but it's not by any means a fully protective piece of gear. Even if you were wearing a respirator, at some point, if you then touch a surface or some other thing, or have a droplet on you, or any number of scenarios that could lead to you bringing it back home when you take off the respirator and then carry it on, it's an issue. And furthermore, it seems like the masks are not necessarily preventing the spread, but hopefully keeping people at a distance. It's more of a reminder, right? I think the whole ethos of my book is that the idea of security, the idea of safety, the idea of protection. So you see someone in a mask and you don't immediately think, I'm going to hand, right? You think, okay, well, we're in a pandemic, we should stay away. These are all the things I've learned. Or that person's sick, on a normal day before pre-COVID world. Okay, well, maybe I should stay away from that person, or maybe they should stay away from me. And so it was a clear sign. But now it's become a sign of, of many different things, of oppression, of hatred, of divisiveness. And I'm not sure where the security went now. Personal protective equipment, maybe not anymore. Maybe personal political equipment at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for me. It's definitely one of the other things that, like, the way that masks have. I mean, I think one of the last study that I looked at still showed that, like, overwhelmingly, it's still more Democrats than more people who identify as Democrats than Republicans are into mask wearing, but it's still overwhelming majorities of both. But it's still the way that, like, wear a mask and you.
I don't think anyone's into mask wearing. I think we'd all choose to not wear a mask if we could.
But it's kind of this, like, I understand. I have several masks. I'm not a huge fan of wearing them, but it's like, yes, I will wear these because I don't want, I want to prevent, it is best practices right now, and this is, yes, I don't want there to be, an epidemic going on for much longer than there needs to be. But it's also the vehemence with which a small group of people have reacted to the idea of wearing a mask still feels a little shocking sometimes.
I think I could relate it a little bit to. I'm not sure if I answered the listener's question enough, but I could relate a lot to the Bulletproof Vest. I don't care to wear the mask. I do. I prefer not to if I could, but I choose to. In the same way that I choose to carry the Bulletproof Vest with me, even though I'm not going to wear it. In the event that a militia pulls up and points a gun at the car, I might not be wearing the Bulletproof Vest, but at least I can put it up against the windshield and try at my very best to eke out some sort of protection. So why would I not put on a 30-cent mask to prevent weeks of hospitalization? The math is just so obvious to me. And even if you're not wearing the mask and you're carrying it with you and you're getting close to someone, you put it on. I mean, that too is even better than just, going about flagrantly without a mask, because who knows what situation you might find yourself in later. You're in an elevator and someone's coughing and you think, oh, well, I wish I had a mask. These are situations you can't plan for. So best to always be as safe as possible, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're wrapping up here with the last 5 minutes, but if any of the attendees have any other questions, we're happy to answer them. As well as if you do choose to purchase one of our books, whether it be in paperback or ebooks, which they're both available in, we both, I think, greatly appreciate either an Amazon or a Goodread review or comment or any notes that you can give us. It would help us put work into our future books and future projects and really take any feedback that we can get. So we always appreciate that.
You have a new book coming out in January, right?
Yes, I have a second book coming out in January.
Nice.
I'm like the pandemic author, I guess, at this point.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah. I'm trying to think. See, something's come up in the chat. Oh, there we are. Yes.
I think we're getting the flashing light. We're getting the exit stage left.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's it. My face is that sign. I'm the flashing light. Thanks so much to both of you for that great discussion, and thanks to all of you for joining us. If you missed any of tonight's event, or if you just want to watch it again, we'll be posting it to our YouTube channel, so please look out for that. And don't forget to buy your copies of Political Sign and Bulletproof Vest in store or online at greenlightbookstore.com. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great night.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Thanks very much.